Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I want to thank everybody who has joined our webinar. I was just confirming this is our third year of doing these webinars. My co-host, Jane Faherty. We have two special guests who we'll get to in a moment. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm in the field of special education law. And with Jane Faherty, who will discuss her background. She's the director of the Stamford JCC JumpStart program. But before we begin, I have a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is the webinar is being recorded. The information provided during the webinar does not constitute specific legal advice to you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with attorney Lawrence Berliner, myself, or a professional relationship with Jane and our two guests, Allie Grafman and Marla Wayne, who are advocates, as well as Jane. By signing up, you've agreed to receive information about future webinars and events from the Stamford JCC and the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. Please note that this webinar is on Zoom, which is a third-party provider. It's not an agent of or associated with the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, Stamford JCC through Jane Faherty, Allie Grafman, or Marla Wayne. We note that in the past, and we certainly welcome them this evening, that some of our attendees have been from other states and from other countries. And we welcome you. However, this webinar is based upon the state of Connecticut issues where I'm licensed to practice, and the focus of our guests and Jane are primarily in the state of Connecticut. So if your state has different laws, check with your state because there may be variations on what we are presenting this evening. Jane and I are for Marla Wayne, and we are continuing to present our Zoom webinars because we are still part of a community of concerned parents and professionals, and we are still learning how to connect with one another. And while in the past we've been citing to COVID-19 pandemic and school closures and hybrid learning and back to school, now that we have a new school year, we have similar issues with our children returning to school. There's a lot of school anxiety. We're learning that academic performance has been compromised. So what we're going to try to do is moderate a series of webinars tonight and throughout the school year to address issues that are still coming to the surface in these unprecedented times. So we've gathered again tonight to address questions and concerns and frustrations. Jane and I received about a half a dozen questions prior to tonight's webinar, and we'll try to get to those as they're appropriate to tonight's topic. We would ask that you use the Q&A format at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions during the webinar. As I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded, and anything that's in the chat section is recorded, but the Q&A is not. Speaking of the chat, you will see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a lot of contact information. Our guests have their contact information. Jane has her contact information, and I have that as well. We also have links to the State Department of Education, which we will refer to periodically, the United States Department of Education's website, ed.gov. And we have two links to some slides that we will go over very briefly during tonight's presentation. So without further ado, I'd like Jane to talk about herself, give some background, and we'll turn this over to our two guests to introduce themselves. And we will go into the topics for tonight, which are the transition back to school, the new IEP document, a top 10 checklist, assessing your child's progress, and preparing for a PPT meeting and when to ask, what to do, when not to ask for a PPT meeting. And then we'll also get to some of the questions. So Jane, welcome to a new school year. Haven't seen you in several months, but
thank you. It's lovely to be back. It's nice to be back after the summer. Thank you, Allie and Marla, for joining us this evening. So I'm Jane Faherty. I'm the Executive Director of a program called JumpStart, located at the Stamford JCC. And we're also going to be opening up a classroom in Norwalk at the Maritime Odyssey preschool program in the new year. JumpStart is for children primarily with developmental disabilities and delays from age 2 to 3. And then I help those children, when appropriate and if eligible, transition into the public school after receiving birth to 3 services. In addition to that, I oversee programming for older children at the JCC in Stamford. We have programs through to young adults and beyond. And I help the Susan McGraw Foundation find community partnerships within the region that we can support to help further and advance the needs of families, children, educators with any disabilities. We have some nice partnerships going on at the moment. So welcome everybody. In addition to that, I do advocate for children once they transition to public school. And as I've been doing this for a number of years, some of my friends are now in middle school and high school. And so the need continues, but it's been a busy start to the school year. Thankfully, slightly less, there's more clarity this year compared to previous years. There is no more remote learning. Children are back in person in the classroom. However, that comes with its own set of challenges, stresses and anxieties, which a lot of the families and the children have been facing as it is a start to a different school year. So we have Allie here tonight and Marla to help us talk about some of those struggles that families might be facing. And also for Marla in particular is going to lead us through some of the changes to the presentation of the IEP document. It's not new in the sense that it still contains the same information you're familiar with having seen in your child's IEP or 504. However, the way in which it's presented is slightly differently. And so we're lucky that Marla can talk us through some of those changes. And Allie's also here to help answer questions we've received beforehand and questions we're going to receive during this presentation tonight. So if you have those questions, please post them in the Q&A, as Lawrence said, because that's a more private format and won't be published when this recording goes out to everybody else. So welcome. Nice to have you both here.
So Allie is one of our returning champions from prior webinars. So why don't we have Allie introduce herself and then Marla as well.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. My name is Allie Grafman. I have a advocacy company. It's abcadvocacy.com. So I invite you all to look at my website. I have been doing advocacy for close to 9 years now. My background has been prior to that in public education. I've been in special education all my adult life. I started as a special education teacher and then entered administration and became an administrator in special education in the public school districts. So I have the perspective of all of that process in public education, and as an advocate, my goal is to work with families to build those bridges with public schools. So communication and collaboration and trust in each other is extremely important, and that is something that I strive to do. So again, I'm very happy to be here and will contribute as much as I can to any of your questions and any of the topics tonight. And I'll turn it over to Marla.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marla Wayne. I'm a special education advocate. I've been doing this or practicing advocacy for approximately 10 years. My background is actually a little different in that I have a son with extreme or severe special needs, cognitive disability, and I've been working through the school districts and the state system since he was very young. He's now 20 and in a transition program. So I became very familiar with advocating in the schools and through DDS, DSS, CFC, et cetera. So my background started with my son, and then over the years, I started helping people and I turned it into a practice, and I've worked with parents of students throughout the state. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I know that Marla, you had some interesting insight for us with regard to some of the changes that have occurred with the presentation of the new IEP and the new format that was launched July of this year. Would you like to share some of those changes with our families to help reassure them and maybe help guide them through the new format, which they might find is slightly different to what they had previously been used to with the paper format?
Yes, definitely. So the system, again, there are areas that are similar, but the formatting is different. Two key areas that are different are that prior written notice and the optional team meeting summary are no longer part of the actual IEP document. They are separate documents. So when you receive an email from CT SEDS, you have a listing of documents in your email, and those will be included in the documents, but they will not be attached to the IEP as before. The area that I'm most concerned about and that I'd really like to talk about are the goals and objectives and how they're going to be measured and the progress is going to be reported. It is somewhat different than on the old IEP. On the old IEP, we had evaluation procedure, which had, for instance, pre and post baseline data, but we also had performance criteria, which would have trials, frequency trials. So most often when I review an IEP and I go to a PPT, I ask for pre and post baseline data so that the goals and objectives are measurable and quantifiable. So on this new IEP, the way that the goals are going to be written is that there's the main body of the goal, and then there are objectives, and the objectives are going to build on each other as a progress monitoring tool. So for example, if you were trying to assess reading fluency or correct words per minute, you would start at a baseline of say 50, and by October be up to 70. And by January be up to 75, and by the end of the school year be up to 85%. So you have a baseline and you want to get to a certain area by a certain month. And these new objectives include an end date when they're written. So if it's possible to share the other screen. Thank you. So here again is an example, as I just discussed, where there's a goal and then the objectives are broken down and there's progress monitoring. And as you can see, it says weekly. On the new IEP, there's a drop-down menu. So when your administrator is typing in the information on the goals and objectives, you want to ask how often the goals and objectives are going to be progress monitored. And the choices range from daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, and bi-monthly. So, and if you don't ask for the specific drop-down box that it be accessed, this information will not come up on the IEP. So it's important that you ask how often this progress monitoring is going to take place.
So Marla, in addition to wanting to know how frequently the progress monitoring will take place, whether it's daily, weekly, or bi-weekly or monthly, is there also a section by which you will know how it is being monitored? Is it done with the dibbles? Will you understand the tools that are going to be used to gather that information?
Yes, so there's two areas. On the evaluation method, also a regular, it says progress will be measured based on mastery or achievement towards short-term objective. So automatically on the IEP that will come up under evaluation method, unless of course you hit that drop-down box, and that's something that someone at the school or administrator at the school needs to do. So once you hit that drop-down box, you could manually write in how you want the objective to be measured. So in this case, I would ask for it to say pre and post baseline data. also in this example, there's something that I don't really like. It says that the objective will be measured based on observed opportunities. I don't like the word observed. I would like it to be measured in a quantitative format. So we could say measured through Ames Web or Dibbles or through being timed. But just to say it was an observance of reading words per minute faster, that's not objective, that's subjective.
And also, Marla, just based upon that, if there are elements that say observed, it's also important to know who is the observer, who is the individual that is being charged with a task to observe a child. Is it a parent? Is it a specialist? Is it a reading specialist with certain qualifications or educational background too? So are those details that you would want written in at this stage or somewhere else in the document?
Oh, there's two stages that you can do that. Well, not who it's going to be assessed by, but on the new page that has the accommodations and modifications, there's also an area that's a small grid, and it has, if you have a goal and you have someone not directly working indirect services, it will have that goal, it will have who is going to perform that indirect service, and frequency, duration, and the months that it'll take place for. So it would be on what used to be page 8, I believe it's 11 now, and the accommodation and modification page has that as well as a few other areas on the IEP. It wouldn't say on the goal of it or objective who would be measuring it, but it could say how it's being measured, or after receiving a certain kind of instruction, what would be expected. So
I just want to say one of the problems with amongst the four of us is we haven't been to enough PPT meetings to see this in operation. Marla has actually seen it in operation with a behind the scenes view. So there's probably going to be more to come as we become more experienced and knowledgeable. And I also learned that schools are also struggling, just like we are, in trying to figure this out. So this next year may be full of, potholes and bumps in the road as this IEP format is being rolled out, both on the parent, for the parents and for the schools as well.
I think one of the most helpful, I guess, suggestions I have for families, parents, would be to become familiar with the drop-down menus from the state. So see what your options are for measuring IEP goals and objectives. See what your options are for any kind of accommodations. I think in the prior IEP, it was all written out. In this new IEP, it's not. So I think that's a really good kind of, understanding of what to ask for and how to proceed with that.
I also think Marla made the very good point, Marla, when you said that it needs to be objective, not subjective. And that's really important, because you need to make sure that things are quantifiable and measurable too, in order to track progress. So as you said, saying just to be observed doesn't give you information that you can then use to build upon or extract from. So I think that, Marla, you hit a very valuable point of making sure the information is quantifiable and qualifiable, so you can track a child's progress meaningfully.
Yes, and the other important thing is even though it says that they're going to progress monitor daily, weekly, or monthly on the IEP, it doesn't mean you're going to receive that information. So if you don't want to wait for your IEP progress report to come out either quarterly or 4 times a year, you can ask in your IEP that in your IEP, it states how often you receive data. So if this were weekly data, I would say, can I receive it weekly? Most likely the district wouldn't want me to wanted to give me data on this weekly, but they might agree to give it to me monthly. And then I would ask that they keep that information on the team meeting summary, which is again optional and no longer part of the document, and or the prior written notice that we agree that we'll be receiving this information, this progress monitoring data monthly. Because even, again, as we all know, even if something is written on the IEP, we're not sure it always happens, and we want to make sure it happens, and we're hopeful that it happens, but we want the proof that it happens.
I think we need to specify what data you're looking for, because that could, be anything. So are you looking for graphs? Are you looking for baselines in current, current schedules as far as student progression? Are you looking for percentages? What is that data? And that's something you want to kind of think about before you even get into the PPT. What do you feel would make a quantifiable understanding of your child's progress?
Right, and some quick examples of that could be is if you had dyslexia reading instruction and there's daily data taken, that we know we would have it taken daily. They'll probably share it weekly. Or if you're in an ABA program, again, that data is taken daily, maybe they'll share it monthly. So you have to have an idea of what kind of instruction your child is receiving, how often it's appropriate to receive that instruction, and then ask to receive copies of that progress monitoring as quickly as possible. The district, of course, won't always agree to give it to you weekly, but most often they will monthly.
I think it's also important at this stage in the year too to share any updated information that you have as a parent. So we, for example, had some children that participated in our summer camp program called Hand in Hand. During that time, we were privy to seeing those children over a 6-week period for some of them, consistently 5 days a week. For a longer session, they typically be in school. During that time, we were able to collect some information that we can then share with the families. So as a parent, don't be shy to share any new data or information that you've collected over the summer months with your teams, because that's important to then use to recalibrate or reassess or reevaluate some of the goals and objectives that were in place last year that have been continued over this year. And you might have additional data that can be added and contributed at this time to help with a baseline to establish where your child is currently performing, because you might have new information that the school district are not privy to, or you might be able to challenge some of the baseline data that they claim to have that you might disagree with and not have seen in your child over the last 3 or 4 months.
And also the new IEP has a section where there's input by the parent or student on both academics and functional performance. So that information could be addressed when giving your input.
Yeah, and that last point with the functional performance, that's where I think the parents are often in the best position, because if a child has learned something in school, he or she should be able to generalize it to home. So if they can read at school, they should read at home. If they can do math at school, they should do it at home. And often I tell parents, save work samples. Or some cases, parents will record their child reading to demonstrate in a home setting the skill is not generalized. So parents are an important source of information. It's just not only the school district's assessments, but it's also how the parents are measuring progress objectively and subjectively as well. So the multiple sources of data, home, school, evaluations, progress monitoring is all very important.
And I think just as you, in this IEP document, you can distinguish between how frequently the data is being collected, whether it's daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. You can also establish and use this as an opportunity to clarify what you would like your communication to be with the district. Are you a parent with a nonverbal child that needs daily communication? Are you a parent with a child that you're more comfortable having weekly communication or bi-weekly communication? I think this is the time of year to establish what you would like that communication to be in terms of frequency, who you'd like the points of contact to be with, and how you'd like that information disseminated to you. Is it through a notebook that goes backs and forwards? Is it through emails? I think this is the time of year to re-clarify and re-establish some of those parameters and expectations that you have with your child's team.
Yeah, and we do have a link to a side-by-side comparison in the chat room. I have a paper copy, but it looks something like this. It's about 20 pages. and they have the old IEP on the left and the new IEP format on the right. So what Marla did was, I think 2 out of about 20 pages were shown, but it is a more detailed document available from the State Department of Education. We have the direct link in the chat, but CT.gov is the. Are there any other questions or comments on this new IEP format?
I think we're going to find that as people become more familiar with it, we're going to have more questions that occur. I know that right now I'm about to participate in some PPT meetings where it's going to come up to the forefront. But I think Allie and Marla have found that educators too are just becoming familiar with it, and that everybody is learning this at the same time. And we're going to be more proficient and more comfortable the more frequently we engage with the document. So I think also as parents, don't be afraid to ask your PPT team to take you through the document and to dedicate time, set some time aside for you to spend with them, understanding how to read it and how to use it, so that you gain the fullest benefit of understanding it.
So in addition to that, Jane, I've been at several PPTs with the new IEP. My families have received the IEP back. And just to be cautious, please, when you get the IEP, be vigilant. One of the IEPs that one of my clients received left out several goals that were discussed at the PPT. And, you know, there's no fingers pointed. I don't think it was done purposefully, but don't forget the staff is new at this as well. And I think there's going to be errors. So, you know, the family didn't even realize it because they're unfamiliar with the IEP. I reviewed it and saw it, you know, right away. And it took me a while to even figure it out. So just be vigilant and review that IEP thoroughly. If you have any questions, you know, ask the school, but certainly it's new to everybody. And that's the reason why we need to be cautious.
Yeah, it's also important. I'm sorry, Jane.
No, I was just going to say, Marla, you mentioned too that the prior written notice and the summary are no longer part of that document. So what recommendations do you have for parents with those two aspects as well?
Right. If you want your point of view written on the IEP outside of the parents' concerns or feedback regarding the goals and objectives, you should ask for the optional team meeting summary to be included. And really important is prior written notice. If you ask for something and the district denies your request, you want to make sure you say, make sure to put that on prior written notice. You want that refusal to be there in writing. And also, and I'm losing my train of thought. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that PPT summary is still optional. And what I tell parents is, regardless of whether it's optional or not, if the record of the meeting, including the prior written notice, the parent input in concern section, any other part of the document is not accurate or it's incomplete, send the school district a note, email. There is something that's new, and I don't know how it works, but there is a parent portal for this new IEP format. And I don't know if that's where you put your comments or you just send the old-fashioned email directly to the teacher, the special ed director, whoever was in charge. But there is a parent portal, and I am not familiar with what is in that. But that's where school district and parent information can be added. As we understood from Brian Klimowitz last March, I think it was, the IEP document is a state document. That is what it will be in the system. Anything that the parent portal is anything else that the school district, and I assume the parents want to put in. So there'll be more to come as we become more familiar as to what's in the parent portal, how parents can communicate to the school district regarding their concerns with the IEP. Is it just sending a letter, a note, an email, or is it something through this new IEP software? So,
yeah, that's where my thought process was going before. I don't know if it is done through the system or through CT sets, but I do know that it's still important when we were talking about as soon as you receive your IEP, within 5 days, if there's anything on that IEP that's incorrect, does not follow in suit with the meeting, or that we want revised that was discussed, we always write a letter with all of the changes and number them so that none of them are lost in translation, and ask that the letter be attached to the IEP. That's really important because you need to document and have it attached to your thoughts, attached to the legal document, which is the IEP.
I also think it's important before PPT meeting that I always send a letter of an agenda so that the district are not surprised. They know the topics that we wish to cover and get through. And also so they allocate enough time for us to get through the concerns that the parents might have as well. So you don't have to give away too much detail, but you can certainly talk about the top line subjects that you might wish to be brought up during the conversation, the meeting. And it can also help just guide to make sure that you as a parent don't forget some of the key items that you had hoped to bring up during the discussion, because we do get distracted along the way and sometimes get caught off guard by our own emotional responses during the meetings.
So
I just want to digress. I don't know if this is universal, but one question was somebody is not being able to see what's in the chat. I can see it. I hope everybody else can, but some of the information that we're talking about is available on ct.gov, which is a state website. And that will open up to departments and agencies, and you will see the alphabet, and you want to click on letter E for education. And that will open up to the Department of Education and Special Education. And I might add, we can try to send these links afterwards, because this is being recorded and it will be part of the recording if it's not available in real time right now. So thank you for whoever asked that question. We apologize if there's a technical glitch. So Allie, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to deal with one issue, and I hope I've answered that person's question.
I was just going to add, there is a process in place to revise the IEP. If you see any errors or any omissions, that IEP can be revised before it's finalized. And I believe the school has 15 days for it to be implemented. So technically the school has 5 days to get the IEP to the families. You have 5 days to review it. And then after that 10-day period, then you have, before the 10 days, you have that time. And then after the 15 days, the 16th day, it gets implemented. So the process that's in place is, to send in your revisions. If it's after those 15 days, you can also do an amendment to the IEP. You do not necessarily have to meet through a PPT, but it has to be agreed upon by the district that you can do an amendment, which is in a form, a legal form that is sent to you. And any revisions can be made on that form. So there is a process. I mean, other than stapling your revisions to the IEP, you would want to make those revisions on the IEP form or through an amendment. So
the amendments are also updated on the current IEP. So the information is all written there as well as the changes. So it's written out what the change was, and then they actually make the changes all on the IEP document now.
I have two comments. One, it appears that the chat is not working, so we will follow up and send this information afterwards. And the other one, I have one school district that's very contentious, and I don't know what your experiences are. When I request an amendment or my clients request an amendment, we get back a form letter, go request a hearing under the Family Education Privacy Rights Act. The Family Education Privacy Rights Act does have a formal hearing process. And if you lose, which is very likely, the remedy is putting your comments in the child's records, educational records. So I tell my clients, skip the hearing and just ask for your amendments to the IEP to add it to your child's records. And that's what I do on behalf of my clients. And this special ed director, unfortunately, keeps sending out these form letters. We're not doing anything. Go request a hearing under the Family Education Privacy Rights Act. Have you been encountering any of that?
I have not had it.
Not yet.
At this point, no.
No.
They save it for you, lad.
The seasoned professional gets that delight.
Oh, okay, I'm just curious. Another area we wanted to just briefly go over, and we will send this out afterwards, but I did have a top 10 items that for transitioning back to the school year. We'll pull it up on the screen. If you give us one moment. Okay, this will be a link, or this document will be sent to everybody who's registered following, and I do appreciate all the feedback because we weren't aware the chat was not working. During the school year, the beginning of the school year, what we want to do, number one is what we're talking about, and that is the demystifying the process of understanding the IEP. So let's see if we can get this to work. And you'll see understanding the IEP, the same applies to the 504 plan, which is a similar document. Some children have disabilities that just require accommodations. That's the 504. Plan, some children, the IEP comes into play. You want to make sure that you understand the lingo, you understand the terms, the technical terms, the acronyms. I have a link to an organization that tells us, what the various acronyms mean, and you want to be able to have, you want to have meaningful input. In order to have meaningful input, you have to understand what the technical terms are. Okay, thank you. I have my getting information on the chat. Whenever there's a question or a concern, I always prefer that small problems remain small, and that usually starts with an informal meeting with school staff to review your questions and concerns regarding the IEP or the 504 plan. If you had a PPT meeting in the prior school year, and things were supposed to be added to the IEP for this year, a piece of equipment, training, hiring staff, changes in methodology, you want to make sure that all of that is in place, because a lot of things happen between June and September. I read constantly about the staff shortages. Well, why do we have staff shortages? Because a lot of staff resigned or they moved to other districts. So you want to make sure that the staff are there that were promised, the equipment, the assistive technology, the methodology. And if it's not, start with your informal meeting. And if that doesn't work, then you want to request a formal PPT meeting to discuss your concerns for enhancing your child's education. Enhancing your child's education is language from the federal regulations. You are an equal member of the team as parents. Equal to everybody else who's on the team. And your concerns are generally a starting point for developing an IEP, reviewing an IEP, and determining whether or not progress is meaningful and appropriate. If you haven't already done so, try to meet with new staff and introduce yourself. I have some parents that will write a note, let me introduce you to my child. This is what he or she likes. This is what they don't like. This works for us at home. Maybe you want to try it at school. And as Marla talked about, the monitoring daily, weekly, monthly, that's important. How you figure that out, whether it's telephone calls, documents, progress monitoring, it's very important that you have this information so you can monitor your child's progress. especially the past couple of years, as we've had the shutdown, the hybrid learning, back to school. There's a lot of anxiety. There's an awful lot of anxiety even today, even though we're back to full-time learning. You are the best judge as parents as to what's happening. You see your child in multiple settings, not just a school setting. If your child is having meltdowns at the end of the school day when they get off the bus, you need to debrief and figure out what's going on. If you're dealing with school refusal in the morning, or you're constantly picking up your child early from school, those are the red flags, and we need to find out what's going on. If you're new to the building, your child is new to the building, try to walk around and become familiar with it. Make sure the lockers are in close proximity to classes, so your child is not carrying a 50-pound backpack because they don't have enough time to go back to the locker, drop off books or laptops or whatever, and go to the next class. So the backpack becomes a black hole where everything goes in, never to emerge. Talk to your child, even if, especially if they're teenagers when they don't want to talk to parents. These are very important skills, developmental skills, and a lot of social skills have been lost over the past 2 or 3 years. You're the best judge to see if there are changes in sleep patterns, social skills, diet, behavior. And if you're seeing, measurable changes, what's going on? Talk to a professional. A pediatrician is often a good starting point. A lot of the schools have mental health professionals that are employed by the school or under contract to the school. I think the governor the other day talked about a $50 million grant for mental health supports that are going into the public schools for this year. So you want to make sure what resources are there. And you want to make sure you're on the same wavelength with the teachers. So we're not having 2 parallel conversations. You want a conversation that's meeting somewhere in the universe. And since we're still not out of this COVID-19 morass, you want to make sure that you're up to date with knowledge on what the requirements are. If there are mask mandates, vaccinations, policies. I had a question the other day about visitation. Are we allowed to visit schools? And I said, well, why not? Just consult the school district's visitation policy, because as far as I know, we can't blame COVID-19 any longer for keeping parents out of the school. So you want to, know what the policies are and respect the policies and the protocols, and make sure that you're safe as a parent, your child and their classmates are safe, and you're following the school district's safety protocols. And safety includes what we have in place, not only for COVID-19, but in this world that we live in now, where we're very security conscious. And so you want to make sure you understand what the policies and the procedures are. And, we start the school year with the greatest of hope, the greatest of expectations, and it's always desirable to end the school year that way. So you're not doubting yourselves and what I should or could have done. You're proactive, you're understanding what your role and responsibilities are, and hopefully you're part of the team. And the team, that's what PPT means, pupil planning or placement team, and team includes parents. So those are, I just want to, and you also make sure you're familiar with your procedural safeguards, because those are your rights and your child's rights. And they often the procedural safeguards are provided online or as part of the PPT notice. It's available on the State Department of Education website, and it's typically available on your local school district's website. And those are your rights. And that way you have this back and forth throughout the school year. You have constructive criticism, constructive comments, and at the end of the school year, you should be able to look back to the month of September and say, these were the gaps that we started at the beginning of the school year, and those gaps have either closed or they're in the process of closing, and that's how you're ultimately going to be measuring progress objectively as well as subjectively. So
I think I think you've raised some really good points there, Lawrence, and also relate to a question that we received prior to tonight's conversation. So you mentioned anxiety and heightened levels of stress exhibited, and that's actually been found to be prevalent throughout society as a result of COVID and all that we've all been through together. So one of the questions we received before tonight was regard to school refusal, avoidance, or chronic absences. How would you recommend a family and a parent moves forward at PPT meeting to discuss school refusal, avoidance, and chronic absences? Ali or Mara or Lawrence, have you had any experience of this recently?
Yes, there's different ways depending on the situation, and different schools go about this differently, but the bottom line is it's helpful to try to set up a plan where a safety plan where the child feels comfortable and is able to slowly transition back into school. But if they're socially and emotionally not able to do that, then the school district needs to work with you to come up with a plan to do homebound tutoring. And I've had many clients who have had homebound tutoring. Younger children often get 5 hours a week and older children 10 hours a week. But that involves a letter and communication from a doctor who will communicate with a school nurse. And it's a very long process and timely process. And the districts don't prefer it, but it happens often. Again, when you want to continue, you're asking about the PPT meetings, you want to continue communicating with the team and you want to continue having PPTs. Of course, if evaluations are due, you won't be able to have them if the student is not in school, but you want to make sure that you keep discussing them so that when the child does get back to school, that they happen as quickly as possible.
Just to add to that a bit, I think this year, at least I'm seeing more anxiety with students than I even did last year. And I think it's more of like a PTSD, you know, it's post-traumatic, and it's kind of just seeping in now. And oftentimes it starts, you know, it's in the family. Adults are even, you know, experiencing that, and filters down to the children. So I have seen a lot of anxiety in a lot of students with chronic absences, school avoidance, just refusal to even go to school. So homebound tutorial, as Marla suggested, is definitely, you know, probably the next step, but it is not a long-term solution. You don't want to keep your child on homebound, you know, indefinitely. So when you go to a PPT, you should think about next steps. And probably one of the very most important next step is an evaluation, whether it is a psychiatric evaluation, a neuropsych, whatever you and the team feel is best. That's probably your next step. The other thing is to seek out the possibility of independent therapy if you already haven't done that, so your individual therapist can communicate with the school. There are many plans that the school can put in place, but if your child is refusing to even go to school, there's no plan for the school to put in place, because they can't have your child if they're not in school. So an evaluation, first step is the homebound and evaluation, and go from there.
In your experience, obviously we experienced remote learning, and for some students that actually proved to be successful. It reduced their social anxiety, allowed them not to have to deal with some of the social conflicts of going to school. Do you find that districts are still open to offering that in a bespoke way when it's appropriate, or are you finding that if that was successful for a child, they're no longer offering that as an option?
They're moving away from that and not offering it.
Well, actually, I find that schools prefer to do remote rather than sending a homebound tutor in the home. It's easier for them. And I think there's more homebound tutors that will do it remotely rather than coming into the home. I think schools basically are reluctant to provide tutoring, whether it's remote or, you know, in the home. But yes, if the student can benefit and through remote, then it's a really good option.
The tutoring could take place through remote, but then the student actually attending the class remotely is what they're moving away from, just to clarify.
Mhm.
That's correct. And I just wanted to add that if you're dealing with, I think the magic number is 10 unexcused absences, you as the parents can get yourselves in trouble with claims of truancy or educational neglect. And this homebound instruction is a way to keep a child connected to school, at least on paper, and that should avoid any claims of unexcused absences. And hopefully by starting small with 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, whatever, you know, we can gradually move back into some kind of bricks and mortar setting, public school, private school, some combination. So it's also important to note that there are policies on excused absences and unexcused absences, and too many unexcused absences can get not only the student, but their parents into some difficulties.
So another question that we received this evening was somebody said that their child was owed more than 30 hours. The Board of Ed said that they would contact them to set up, I guess, reimbursement of those hours. But as of today, they still hadn't heard back from the district. Who would you recommend that they contact tomorrow to remedy this situation?
I have a similar case where students owe 20 hours, and we actually have filed a few complaints with the State Department of Special Education. The child, unfortunately, though, was in a charter school, and it was a different district overseeing the charter school. So each district is trying to pawn the responsibility off on each other. And though the state did say that the hours are owed, the hours have not taken place yet. So, but you can file complaints. You can ask for different options if actually the district doesn't have someone to do it. Can they hire a consultant? Can you hire a tutor? But it's difficult if they're not, even if they agree, if they're not actually giving you the hours that you're supposed to have. But legally, they have to give you those compensatory hours. Unfortunately, it's often difficult to get. So I would contact the state at this point if the district isn't following through. First, I'd contact the district to make sure they're not going to follow through, both in writing and via phone. And then I would contact the state if you don't receive a response.
Yeah, and I'd make sure you document everything in writing. Even though somebody might have said to you verbally, we agree that we owe you these hours, please make sure you document that in writing. When you get off a phone call with somebody, write a letter confirming what the content of your conversation had just been, with a date and time as well, just so you have it for the record. Because unless something is written down in documentation, it doesn't necessarily exist per se. So I think written communication is a powerful tool, and also helps you as a parent to remember and keep a track of communication that you've had and who you've had it with, and also to keep account of the timeline within which they have or have not responded to you by as well is really important. Another piece of your own data to keep track of and to collect.
Yeah, and the complaints that Marla is referring to, these are called CRP complaint resolution procedure complaint. And there is a booklet available on the State Department of Education website. There is a form. You don't have to use the form, just send an email to the Bureau of Special Education or call them up on the phone, speak to one of the consultants that's their job title, consultants that handles complaints. And then you want to follow up in writing. If you have a phone call, follow up in writing. If you have emails, other correspondence to share with the State Department of Education documenting what you have tried to do on the local level, it helps them understand what you've tried to do and why or when and where the wheels went off the track with respect to the school district being non-responsive.
So would that be the same answer for another question we received? So we received the question, whom investigates schools in Connecticut when you are when the children are being neglected and discriminated against? Would that be a similar process?
It's a good question, but it's conflated several concepts. Discrimination on the basis of a protected status, typically race, creed, sex, national origin, disability. There are a few others under state and federal law. That's not an exhaustive list, are often investigated by civil rights agencies. The U.S. Department of Education has an Office for Civil Rights known as OCR. OCR complaints alleging violations of certain federal laws can be investigated by that federal agency. These are not lawsuits, these are administrative complaints. In Connecticut, we have the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, which is a state agency that investigates civil rights claims, discrimination arising under state law and occasionally federal law. If we're talking about abuse and neglect in a school setting, the Department of Children and Families, known as DCF, is the state agency that investigates allegations of abuse and neglect. And abuse and neglect, you have what are called mandatory reporters like teachers and nurses and doctors and paraprofessionals and principals. But if you're a non-mandated reporter like a parent, there's nothing preventing you as a parent from saying, this is what's going on in school that's causing abuse, allegations. They're only allegations of abuse and neglect. So depending on whether we're talking about abuse and neglect, depending on whether we're talking about discrimination on the basis of protected status, that will determine who, what agency, state or federal, will investigate those allegations.
In addition to that, I would just add that you would want to document every claim that you have, like any instance, the date that it happened, when it happened, if there was a discrimination, who is responsible. So you have a log of that, because I think somebody said it before, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So it's got to be documented.
That last point is excellent, and I say that for the IEP. If it's not in the IEP, it doesn't exist. If you're complaining to the school district, for example, bullying, I have many parents say, I spoke to the teacher and principal. The law requires a written complaint. So the more you do in writing, the better, and that way you have this electronic paper trail or a paper trail to show your efforts, and that's critically important.
So we have some other questions here in a Q&A that we received this evening, one of which is, can special transportation needs requested be added into the IEP? And the answer is yes.
Absolutely. The free appropriate public education standard doesn't begin or end at the front door of the school. Buses are an extension of the school, and the transportation has to be appropriate to the child's unique needs. I was on a listserv last night and this issue came up, and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP, OSEP, has a very extensive frequently asked questions document from, I think it was 2009. It looks still, I read it last night, it looked current. So there's a lot of information on transportation as a related service being appropriate as in free appropriate public education.
There's another question related to transportation here. It says, how do you handle a charter magnet not offering specialized transportation for an anxious student? Would that be any different?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can we open that up? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read the question.
How do you handle a charter magnet not offering specialized transportation for a highly anxious student? Well, I guess it depends if the student has an IEP or not.
Well, yes, I mean, you get specialized transportation in one of two ways. Either the 504 plan is arranging that as an accommodation to a child's disability. Let's say the bus is not accessible and they need an accessible van or bus. And the other way is in the IEP itself, which is called a related service. It could be speech and language. It could be occupation related service. And that's where I mentioned the US Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs policy guidance. I think it was in 2009, very extensive series of questions and answers for that matter. So I think that charter magnet school is, well, let me rephrase that. The charter school is independent of the public school. So the question is, who's writing the IEP? If it's the charter school, they're responsible for implementing the IEP and arranging for the related services of transportation. If it's a magnet school, they're attached to some school district or a region of school districts. So whoever is writing the IEP, public school, charter school, magnet school, who's ever writing the IEP is responsible for ensuring that the services are listed in the IEP and are delivered. And that would include any related service such as transportation. So go back to whoever is responsible for writing the IEP, the public school district where the child is enrolled, or the charter school because they have a charter from the public school to deliver services that are supposed to be better, or the magnet school because it's part of, I guess, school choice. So somebody, the buck does stop somewhere. It's just, I'm not sure if it starts and stops at the public school, the charter school, or the magnet school. Those would be the three options. And then as far as the anxiety, maybe we need a bus monitor. Maybe we need to figure out the source of the anxiety. I've had students have a trusted adult or a trusted peer ride with them, or sometimes the large bus is the source of anxiety, and a smaller bus or a van is a way to deal with the child's anxiety.
So another question that we received this evening is, what type of training can you request to be added in an IEP? Would this be like Orton Gillingham certification, for example?
Of the person teaching the student?
Yes.
Yes, if you have a dyslexic child and you're asking that they receive a certified Orton Gillingham or certified Wilson reading instructor, you can make that request. But many of the districts now have them. For a long time they didn't, and people were getting outplaced. But yes, you can definitely make that request. And or if you're referring to other services, you can request things like BCBAs, ABA therapists, RBTs. Is that along the lines of the question? Just in general, what kind of services can you request?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just an important point that when your child requires a specialist type of training or therapeutic, you make sure you have the right person delivering that therapeutic support and that they have the right experience and expertise. For example, prompt speech, you need to make sure that they are trained in prompt speech, and what level of prompt speech are they receiving that training, from the specialist. If they are receiving ABA support services, do they have an RBT helping them? Is it an ABA or is it a BCABA? So it is important to understand the level of expertise and training that from the individual that is sharing that, sharing that skill with your child, because it can make a difference. The same as if you have a PTA or an OTA. That doesn't necessarily mean that the PTA or the OTA are not as skilled or as good at connecting and engaging with your child as somebody with more experience, but it is important in some instances to know the level of expertise that that individual has that's working and engaging with your child, particularly if you don't see progress being made. It could be as a lack of experience or expertise from the person delivering that support service.
It's actually included in the IEP under accommodations. So if, let's just say your child needs specific assistive technology and the classroom teacher is supposed to implement this technology in the classroom, and that classroom teacher doesn't have the experience or whatever, it's part of the IEP that the training is provided to that teacher or whoever needs to be trained. You as parents and guardians also are entitled to training. So if you have, you know, the, I guess the opportunity to, or the need, I should say, to use technology, assistive technology at home with your child, and you are not familiar with the technology, you have the entitlement to get that training at home. So it becomes part of the IEP. And again, it needs to be documented on the IEP.
That's important because parent training is one of the related services. And as Allie just said, you have to have it in the IEP. And if you're not making your request, it's not going to be heard. And if you made the request and it wasn't heard, make sure the record of the meeting includes your request for whatever the request is. And if it's not there, request an amendment to the IEP document to include your request and your concerns.
Parent training is so important for a child to be able to generalize their skills across all environments, across all settings. And you also want to have consistency too. So if you're not sure of the methodology that you're using to teach your child to read, for example, then how can you support them appropriately and effectively at home? So it really is important to be engaged. You're not an educator, you're not expected to have the same qualifications or experiences as those in the public school, but it's helpful for you to have consistency with the way in which you're approaching your child if you're supporting them at home with their academics or with some of their general life skills, so that the child has consistency across all environments as well, so that they can generalize and master those skills in whatever environment they're actually functioning within.
It also impacts other areas aside from academics. I mean, if your child has, let's say, behavior difficulties, you know, within the home, that is certainly impacting him or her to function daily. That is a service that can be requested at a PPT, and training for the parents is available. So it goes through all domains: social, emotional, related services, speech and language, anything that the parents have the need to work with their children at home that requires training. You are entitled as a family to have that training.
Yeah, and that, what Allie is saying is critically important, because if there's a behavior plan at school, whatever the behavioral techniques that are being used at school, it's often advisable to have what works at school transferred to the home setting, or vice versa. Whatever works at home is shared with the school, so the student is not getting mixed messages. We do it this way at school, but you do it differently at home. And that way the child is not getting the mixed messages, and hopefully the behavior plan, the assistive technology, whatever you know has to go across both settings, is being provided with enhanced training of the parents.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with saying that you need some help and support, or that you don't understand something. That's what they're there for. You're not expected to be an expert in the areas that they are. So use them as your resource. They're a resource for your child, and they're a resource for you too.
Yeah, and that's actually one of our questions: what to ask for at a PPT meeting. What do you want for your child? And I said it facetiously, but I also said it seriously: everything. Whatever your concerns are, you bring them to the table. Don't assume that the school district is clairvoyant and can read your mind. They can read an email. They can listen to your words during a PPT meeting. So ask whatever your wisdom, your experience, your instincts are telling you. This is what my child needs in order to be successful, not only in school, but generalizing those skills to other settings: home, community, restaurants, supermarkets, wherever the skills need to be generalized. So I guess don't be shy. And I know it's very it can be very intimidating to go to these meetings when there's 15, 20 school staff and you're there alone, or maybe with one other person. But this isn't a democratic process where we take a vote and it's always going to be 10 to 15 to 1 or 2. It's supposed to be a consensus building meeting where your concerns for enhancing your child's education are considered. The school district listens. They're supposed to convert those concerns into the language of the IEP. And hopefully at the end of the process, we reach a consensus opinion. If not, make sure the record reflects what you asked for that was provided and agreed to, as well as what you asked for that was refused and denied.
You bring up a good point. I always suggest to my families before PPT to be prepared for that PPT. So when you're thinking about, oh, I'd like my, child to do this, or you have a concern about this, write up a list. Because at the PPT, you're multitasking, and there's so many people, and you can get distracted. And if you're like me, you get flustered. If I was a parent, that's what would happen. So you would want to make sure that you have something that you can refer to at the PPT. I use it all the time. I have visuals. I have my to-do list, and I think that that's something that is very, very helpful. So if you have concerns, you write out your list and you ask for it at the PPT. The worst case scenario is they say no, but you would want to make sure that you give evidence on why you're asking for this. Evidence is really important, like what brings you to this point that your child needs this service. And, you can certainly discuss that, but there's no harm in asking.
We had one question where an individual the school district is denying requests to be reimbursed for private busing. Well, transportation as to a neighborhood school, or maybe a magnet school or a charter school in another town, the school district is responsible for arranging or providing it. There is a default position, and that is the school district is required to offer, I should say, to reimburse the parents for their costs using the IRS business mileage rate, which is about 62 cents per mile. So if that's the default position, so whoever is asking that question about busing, if it's specialized transportation listed in the IEP, that means it's specialized transportation. If it's garden variety transportation, it has to be provided just like any other child who goes to public school. You're entitled to public school transportation with a school bus or an alternative to a school bus. If it's specialized transportation, then that's the part of the IEP. If it's written into the IEP, that has to be implemented as written. And this is where thinking out of the box, being creative, rather than just simply saying no, because no isn't the proper answer if it's in the IEP. And then I had a very long question about a very young child who's struggling in kindergarten. My short answer for a child who's behaviorally dysregulated, I don't know if the child does or doesn't have an IEP. If they don't have an IEP, you should ask for a referral to special education and a comprehensive evaluation of the child's actual or suspected disabilities. If the child has an IEP, it's the same answer. Request a PPT meeting and find out why the IEP is not meeting the child's needs. Why is the child pushing chairs, throwing food, or otherwise becoming behaviorally dysregulated? Because that's the denial of a free, appropriate public education. So I know we're at an appointed hour of closing tonight's webinar. And I, would like to get to all the questions, but unfortunately, we can't always do that. And so I hope we got to as many questions as possible. I hope we have provided resources for everybody who's registered. We will provide the information that was in the chat section, which you understand was not working this evening, and we apologize. So I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I want to thank Jane, and she'll give her closing remarks. Allie and Marla, they will give their closing remarks. We will continue our Zoom presentations throughout the 22-23 school year. We plan to hold conversations with experts in the field and keep a watchful eye on new developments, and there are many developments that are happening in the field of special education, as well as health, mental health, emotional health as the year progresses. We will have our next webinar on October 25th at 7 p.m. And Jane Faherty will be leading that with her expertise and passion in the field of birth to three. And I believe we're going to have another guest to join Jane on a birth to three provider, so we can continue the conversation. So we welcome your questions if you are seeking information about birth to three, transition from birth to three into special education. And I want to again thank Jane, Allie, and Marla for your collaborative efforts and thoughts this evening. And most of all, I want to thank my daughter, Rachel, who's off screen, who's helping me or us, navigate the technological part of tonight's webinar, as well as doing all the legwork and arranging the webinar and learn more about future events. Please check my Facebook and website and the JCC website and their Facebook page, and we'll have the links to all of that after this, when we send out the recording of tonight's meeting. So Jane, Allie, and Marla, thank you, and I'll let you each provide your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Larry. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. Apologies if we didn't get to all your questions. We will be hosting more of these roundtable conversations, discussions as the year goes on. The next session will be geared more towards birth to three, explaining what it is, evaluation, the process and the transition from birth to three to the public school. But I think it would be very appropriate to have another roundtable discussing IEPs and your experiences during this process towards the end of the year, particularly once we've got through a grading period and you yourselves have experienced the new format of the IEP process. In the meantime, though, it's been a pleasure having Allie and Marla back tonight. And in addition to providing this educational webinar, through JumpStart, we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. We also like to support you as caregivers to connect and meet together in the community, because this is about building a sense of community so you don't feel alone and isolated in your journey, and to meet with others that might be experiencing similar things or further along the journey than you are. So we have these social events publicized. It's all free, and we have another one coming up in Stamford this Friday. So if you check out the Facebook page or Instagram page of JumpStart, you'll see a list of different activities we have going on, anything from coffee meetups where I might attend through to paint and sips. We host axe throwing. We've done all sorts of wonderful things to bring you together to meet in person. I try and attend as many of those as I can. So please come out and say hello. And in the meantime, it's been a pleasure having Allie and Marla here again to share their experience and expertise. So thank you for joining us this evening.
I'm just going to reiterate what both of you have said. Thank you for participating in the audience tonight. It's always my pleasure to be able to work with families. It's my passion. It's the beginning of the school year, which is in a very, very exciting time. I know parent conferences are coming up. So, just build up those questions. And, it's a great time to start thinking about, communication in collaboration with your school. Have a great school year. And again, if I can be of any help, visit my website, abcadvocacyllc.com, and I'll be there for you. Thank you very much.
And I will echo the same. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone for joining us. And I just want everyone to remember about those drop-down boxes on the new IEP. And I am available for questions pertaining to the IEP and to work as an advocate on your behalf. But those drop-down boxes, remember the evaluation measure monitoring and the progress monitoring schedule. Really important. Thank you.
So thank you all, and thank you for all who have participated in tonight's webinar. And we will see everybody, we hope, next month. Thank you and good night.